Welcome back to the channel. If you're here late at night looking for a story to drift off to, you're in the right place. Before we begin, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. Elena Cruz was the kind of person people noticed without really trying. Born on October 3, 2002, in the coastal city of Clearwater, Florida, she carried an energy that felt almost contagious. Whether she was behind the counter at a neighborhood pharmacy or laughing with friends outside a cafe, Elena had a way of making people feel seen. Her family often said her smile could change the mood of an entire room, especially during the holidays, when she seemed to glow brighter than anyone else. She wasn't tall, barely reaching 5 feet, but she had a presence that made her seem bigger. Elena loved makeup, not out of vanity, but because she enjoyed the process, the creativity of it. It was her way of expressing herself, of putting a little color into a world that often felt routine. She had graduated from North Bay High with strong grades, even while navigating the challenges of becoming a young mother. Her son, Mateo Rivera, was born on April 14, 2021. From the moment he arrived, he became the center of her life. Mateo had wide, curious brown eyes and a quiet, playful nature. He loved cartoons, especially anything involving animated toys or bright colors, and he followed his mother everywhere when she was home. When Elena worked, she would call him during her breaks, smiling through the screen as he tried to grab the phone or babble back at her. Mateo's father, Marcus Hale, was present, but only loosely. He drifted in and out of Elena's life, never fully committing to responsibility. He was unemployed, occasionally getting into trouble, and had a reputation for being unpredictable. Some family members believed he struggled with deeper issues, though nothing had ever been formally diagnosed. Elena's older sister, Daniela, once told investigators that Elena had described Marcus as controlling, someone who needed things done his way or not at all. On March 18, 2023, Marcus turned 21. That morning, Elena video called Daniela while sitting in a small pediatric clinic with Mateo, who had been running a mild fever. The call was casual at first, just two sisters catching up, but Daniela later recalled something felt off. Elena seemed tired, distracted. When asked, she brushed it off, saying Mateo hadn't been sleeping well and had been fussy all morning. Later that afternoon, the family gathered for a small birthday celebration at Elena's apartment. It was a warm, bright day, the kind that made everything feel normal, even hopeful. There was cake, music, and laughter. Mateo, still not feeling well, spent most of the time asleep in the bedroom. The party wrapped up early. Around 5 p.m., relatives began leaving, each heading back to their routines. Before Daniela left, she remembered seeing Marcus sitting quietly, almost withdrawn. Elena mentioned in a text later that Marcus hadn't liked his birthday gift, a simple art kit the family had picked out for him. It seemed like a small thing, but it lingered in her mind. The next morning, Daniela expected Elena to drop Mateo off before her work shift. When she woke up late and realized they hadn't arrived, she tried calling. No answer. She tried again. Still nothing. At first, it didn't feel urgent. Elena was responsible, but life with a toddler could be unpredictable. Maybe she overslept. Maybe Mateo was still sick. But as the hours passed, unease began to creep in. Daniela called their mother, Lucia. She hadn't heard from Elena either. Concerned, they asked a relative to stop by Elena's apartment. When she arrived, she knocked several times, but no one answered. Elena's car was still in the parking lot. That detail made everything feel heavier. They contacted the apartment office, requesting a welfare check. A maintenance worker, Carlos Mendez, was sent with a master key. Carlos knocked first. Silence. He unlocked the door and stepped inside. At first, nothing seemed unusual. The living room was quiet, undisturbed, but then he noticed something that made him stop cold. There were faint marks on the floor, dark, irregular shapes that didn't belong. He moved cautiously toward the hallway. The bathroom door was slightly open. When he pushed it wider, he immediately stepped back. Elena was lying face down on the floor. There was blood, too much of it. Carlos didn't move closer. He didn't need to. After years of working in maintenance, he had seen accidents, natural deaths. This was different. This was violent. He quickly scanned the apartment, calling out for Mateo, but there was no response, no sound, no movement. He left immediately and called emergency services. When officers arrived, they secured the scene and confirmed what was already clear. Elena Cruz was dead, but Mateo was nowhere to be found. Within hours, an alert was issued for the missing 2-year-old. His description spread quickly across the region. Police began canvassing the area, knocking on doors, speaking to neighbors, trying to reconstruct the last known moments inside that apartment. One neighbor reported hearing raised voices the night before. There had been shouting, a child crying, and a woman's voice yelling, "Stop." The time was estimated to be just after 8 p.m. After that, silence. Investigators turned their attention to Marcus Hale. When Elena's family went to his house looking for answers, they learned something unsettling. Marcus had returned home the night before with serious injuries. His arms were cut badly enough that he had been taken to the hospital. He claimed he'd been in a fight, but the explanation didn't sit right. Officers soon located his vehicle. There was blood on the outside, more inside. In the front seat, they found a small blanket, one that matched Mateo's, stained with blood. In the back seat sat a large television. When investigators checked Elena's apartment, they realized something chilling. Her television was missing. At the hospital, Marcus was sedated following surgery. Officers stationed themselves nearby, waiting for him to wake. When he finally did, they asked the only question that mattered: "Where is Mateo?" Mateo's response was defensive, aggressive. He denied knowing anything, insisting officers should be out searching instead of questioning him. But by then, suspicion had already begun to harden into something far more serious. Phone records added another layer. Elena's phone last pinged near a public park just before 9 p.m. the night she died. Search teams were deployed immediately. Drones, canine units, officers on foot. Every inch of the park was combed. As the sun dipped lower, a man approached one of the officers. He looked unsure, hesitant. He said he might have seen something in the water. What happened next would change the entire investigation. The man led officers toward a narrow stretch of water that cut through the park, a quiet canal that most people passed without a second glance. At first, nothing seemed out of place. The surface was still, reflecting the fading light of the evening sky. Then one officer saw it, an alligator, partially submerged near the bank. At first, it looked like the animal was simply resting, but as the officer moved closer, something in its jaws caught his attention. It wasn't movement, it was shape. Small, unnatural. The officer's voice over the radio was tight, controlled, but urgent. Backup was called immediately. Within minutes, the area was swarming with law enforcement. The alligator shifted slightly, and for a brief moment, the truth became unmistakably clear. There was a child in its mouth. A single shot rang out across the water. The animal released its grip. Officers rushed forward, pulling the small body from the canal. Even before official confirmation, many already knew. It was Mateo. The scene fell into a heavy silence, the kind that settles when reality becomes too difficult to process. For the officers present, it was a moment that would stay with them long after the case was closed. An autopsy later revealed that Mateo had drowned before entering the water. The injuries caused by the animal came afterward. That detail mattered. It meant this wasn't an accident. It was deliberate. With that discovery, the investigation shifted rapidly. What had started as a missing child case was now a double homicide. Police moved quickly to secure Marcus Hale's family home. With a warrant, they searched the property, collecting anything that might explain what had happened in the hours after Elena's death. Security footage from the home showed Marcus arriving late that night, just after 9 p.m. His movements were erratic. He was visibly injured, his clothes stained. Inside his car, forensic teams found more evidence. Blood patterns suggested movement, struggle. The child's blanket told its own story. Every piece pointed in the same direction. Marcus was arrested and charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. When questioned again, he continued to deny involvement. His behavior shifted between anger and detachment, offering no explanation for the evidence mounting against him. Investigators began reconstructing the timeline. After the birthday gathering ended, something had changed. Whether it was an argument, frustration, or something deeper that had been building for months, no one could say for certain. But by the time neighbors heard shouting around 8 p.m., events were already spiraling. Elena had tried to resist. Evidence in the apartment showed signs of a violent struggle. She had been attacked repeatedly, the wounds indicating not just intent to kill, but overwhelming force. At some point after, Marcus left the apartment. Mateo was still alive. Phone data placed Elena's device near the park shortly before 9 p.m. Investigators believe Marcus drove there with the child in the car. What happened next was pieced together through forensic analysis and circumstantial evidence. Mateo was drowned. His body was then left in the canal. By the time authorities began searching the following day, it was already too late. Back at the hospital, Marcus's behavior continued to raise concerns. Medical professionals noted inconsistencies in his presentation. Some believed he might be dealing with underlying mental health issues. Others suspected he was exaggerating or attempting to avoid responsibility. The legal process slowed as evaluations were ordered. In August 2024, a court ruled that Marcus was not competent to stand trial at that time. He was transferred to a state psychiatric facility for further assessment and treatment. The question of whether his condition was genuine or fabricated became a central issue. Meanwhile, Elena's family faced a different kind of battle. Grief, immediate and overwhelming. Lucia, her mother, spoke publicly in the days following the discovery, asking for answers, for justice, but most of all for her daughter and grandson to be remembered for who they were, not just how they died. Community members organized vigils, candles lined the sidewalks, flowers and stuffed animals were placed outside Elena's apartment, a quiet tribute to a life cut short and a child who never had the chance to grow. A fundraiser was launched, initially to support search efforts. After Mateo was found, it was redirected to cover funeral expenses. Donations came in from strangers, neighbors, and people across the country who had followed the case. There was another complication. Because Marcus was Mateo's legal father, the release of the child's remains required his authorization. With him in custody, the process became tangled in legal constraints. The situation sparked outrage. Advocates pushed for change, arguing that in cases involving suspected family violence, custody laws should not create additional barriers for grieving relatives. Within a year, new legislation was introduced to address that exact issue, allowing alternative next of kin to make decisions in such circumstances. It was a small measure of progress born from a devastating loss. Elena and Mateo were laid to rest together during a quiet ceremony attended by family, friends, and members of the community. Stories were shared, not about the violence, but about Elena's laughter, her determination, and the way Mateo would light up when he saw her face on a screen. In the months that followed, the apartment where it all happened stood empty. Eventually, it was cleared, then renovated, but for many, the memory of what happened there never really faded. Cases like this leave behind more than evidence and court dates. They leave questions that don't always have clear answers. What pushes someone past that point? Could it have been prevented? And how do the people left behind carry something like this forward? For Elena's family, those questions remain, but so does something else. The memory of a young woman who fought to build a life for her child, and a little boy who for a brief time was the center of her world. Ethan and Noah Carter were the kind of boys people in their neighborhood noticed, even if they didn't know their names. 14 and 13, just a year apart, they were the oldest of 6 siblings growing up in a cramped brick house on Eldridge Lane, tucked inside a quiet suburb of Nottingham called Ravenshill. It wasn't the kind of place that made headlines. It was the kind of place where everyone recognized each other at the corner shop and where neighbors casually kept an eye on one another's children. Ethan, the older of the two, had a restless energy about him. He loved football, loud laughter, and anything with wheels. Cars, dirt bikes, even old engines he'd find lying around. He wanted to take them apart and figure out how they worked. He had ADHD, which often got him into trouble at school, but no one who knew him ever described him as difficult. If anything, they called him warm. He was the one who cracked jokes when things got tense, the one who noticed when someone felt left out. Noah was different, quieter, more sensitive. He struggled with anxiety and had a harder time fitting in, especially at school, where he sometimes became an easy target for bullies. But there was a gentleness to him that stood out. He cared deeply, sometimes too deeply, for his own good. When one of his friends was diagnosed with a serious illness, Noah shaved the sides of his head and dyed the rest a bright, unnatural shade of orange to raise awareness and money. It made him stand out even more, but he didn't care. To him, it was worth it. The two brothers shared a bond that was easy to see. They weren't just siblings, they were a team. They lived with their mother, Laura Carter, a woman most people described as overwhelmed but devoted. Raising 6 children alone wasn't easy, and Laura often leaned on help from extended family, especially her half-brother, Daniel Reeves. To outsiders, Daniel was just the uncle who was always around. He fixed things, ran errands, and stepped in when needed. Quiet, agreeable, always willing to help. No one questioned it. Inside the Carter home, life was chaotic but seemed manageable. The front garden was overgrown, the paint chipped, and the windows often stayed shut. But the children were fed, clothed, and when social workers visited, everything appeared fine. That word would come back later. Fine. Laura had a long history with social services. She had grown up in a difficult environment herself, marked by instability and trauma. Some of her children had additional needs, and she had reached out for support multiple times over the years. Social workers checked in regularly, but their reports painted a familiar picture, a struggling parent doing her best. No one flagged the household as dangerous, not officially. But there was one person who never believed that version of events. Laura's older brother, Michael Carter, had always felt something was off. His concerns went back years, long before Ethan and Noah were teenagers. He remembered incidents that didn't sit right, moments that, taken individually, could be explained away, but together formed a pattern he couldn't ignore. He recalled one afternoon when Ethan was just a toddler. They had been outside walking near a park when Daniel suddenly grabbed the boy's arm and dragged him harshly across the pavement. There was no clear reason, no warning, just sudden, unnecessary force. He reported it. Nothing came of it. There were other moments, too, stories from childhood that Michael couldn't forget. He described Daniel as unpredictable, someone who could turn violent without warning.
And Laura, he said, wasn't someone who stopped him. If anything, she encouraged him. The two of them shared a bond that made others uncomfortable, though no one could quite explain why. Michael made multiple calls to social services over the years. Each time he heard the situation would be reviewed. Each time he heard nothing back. Eventually, he stopped expecting anything to change. Inside the Carter home, the children grew up under rules that weren't always clear. Laura could be affectionate one moment and cold the next. Visitors would sometimes hear her say things that felt wrong, even if they couldn't explain why. One phrase, repeated more than once, stayed with people. "I gave you life, I can take it away." Most dismissed it as stress, a frustrated mother venting. No one took it literally. As Ethan and Noah entered their teenage years, things became more complicated. There were behavioral issues, arguments, reports from school that raised concerns. At one point, Ethan got into serious trouble after an incident involving another child. The details were unclear, but it was enough for social services to step in more actively. A caseworker was assigned. Meetings were scheduled. Laura was advised to maintain stricter supervision, including keeping doors open and monitoring interactions more closely. In a small, crowded house, that was easier said than done. Still, the system continued to treat the situation as manageable, correctable, but beneath the surface, pressure was building. In May 2019, things escalated. Social workers arranged a private meeting with the children without Laura present. It wasn't unusual, but for Laura, it felt like a loss of control. When she learned afterward that the family would be placed under closer observation, something shifted. She became defensive, uncooperative. Questions about the children's father, long avoided, were raised again. Laura refused to answer. Investigators began to sense that there were secrets in the household that hadn't been uncovered. Then came a phone call. On May 23rd, someone contacted Laura with a new allegation involving Noah. The caller threatened to report it to the police. Whether the claim was true or not almost didn't matter. For Laura, it was confirmation of her worst fear. Everything was about to collapse. Her children could be taken away, and the truth, whatever it was, might come out. What happened next didn't occur in a single moment of panic. Evidence would later show that Laura had been thinking about drastic measures for some time. Messages she sent to friends hinted at a growing sense of desperation. Social media posts became darker, filled with imagery and language that suggested she was spiraling. But no one intervened in time. That night, inside the house on Eldridge Lane, Laura began collecting medications, painkillers, prescriptions, anything she could find. Her plan, though no one knew it yet, was simple. If she couldn't keep her family together, no one would have them. She mixed the drugs together and forced her older children to take them. They resisted. They didn't understand, but she insisted, pushing past their fear, telling them it was necessary. Slowly, the house grew quiet. The children became drowsy, disoriented. Laura believed that by morning it would all be over. But it wasn't. The dosage wasn't enough. By early morning, the children were sick, but alive. And now, Laura faced something she hadn't planned for: failure. At around 5 a.m., she called Daniel. Her voice was urgent. Whatever hesitation might have existed before was gone. Within the hour, he arrived at the house. What happened next would turn a hidden nightmare into an irreversible tragedy.
What happened next unfolded quickly, almost mechanically, as if Leanne had already crossed a point of no return days earlier. After the failed poisoning attempt, panic took over. The children were still alive, weak, sick, but alive. That wasn't part of her plan. At around 5 a.m., Leanne called Marcus. Her voice was urgent, strained. She told him things hadn't worked, that she needed him there immediately. Marcus didn't hesitate. He arrived at the house on Alder Grove just before sunrise. The neighborhood was silent, most people still asleep, unaware that inside one of those ordinary homes something irreversible was about to happen. Inside, the air was heavy. The children were groggy, some barely able to stand. They trusted their mother. Even then, they trusted her. That trust would be the last thing taken from them. Leanne and Marcus moved with chilling coordination. There was no argument, no second guessing. They had already convinced themselves this was necessary, that this was somehow better than the alternative. Ethan was the first to realize something was wrong. He resisted, he struggled, he begged. But he was only 14, weakened from the drugs, facing two adults who had already made their decision. Marcus overpowered him. Leanne used the cord from her dressing gown. The room filled with chaos, fear, and desperate cries that went unanswered. Liam saw what was happening. He tried to intervene, shouting, yelling for help, for it to stop. But Marcus turned on him next. Within minutes, both boys were unconscious. It didn't end there. To make sure there was no chance of survival, they placed plastic bags over the boys' heads. It was methodical, deliberate. And then, just like that, it was done. 2 lives, full of energy and promise, extinguished in the very place that was supposed to keep them safe. But something shifted after that. Maybe it was the silence, maybe it was the reality finally sinking in, or maybe it was the presence of the younger children still alive, still watching. Because what came next didn't follow the same cold logic. Leanne turned her attention to one of the younger kids. She tried to drown the child in the bathtub. The child fought back, screaming, asking a question no child should ever have to ask. "Why are you doing this?" For reasons that were never fully explained, she stopped. Something cracked. Instead of continuing, Leanne gathered the remaining children into one room. Her hands were shaking now. The control she had earlier was slipping. Then she did something unexpected. She called the police. Officers arrived between 7:30 and 7:45 that morning. From the outside, nothing looked unusual, just another quiet street, another family home. But inside, the tension was immediate. Leanne tried to maintain composure. When asked about Ethan and Liam, she claimed they were staying with someone else. But the children told a different story. One of them made a subtle gesture, drawing a hand across their throat. Leanne noticed. She snapped, telling them to stop. It was too late. Officers searched the house. They found Ethan and Liam in their bunk beds, plastic bags still covering their heads. The scene was enough to confirm what no one wanted to believe. Emergency services rushed the other children to the hospital. They survived, physically at least. Emotionally, the damage would take far longer to understand. Leanne was taken into custody. At first, she admitted only to giving the children medication. She downplayed everything else, avoiding the full truth. Marcus didn't. He confessed, not just to the killings, but to the mindset behind them. He described a disturbing impulse, a moment where he felt like taking life, as if it were something that simply came over him. That statement alone chilled investigators, because it stripped away any illusion of panic or confusion. What they had done wasn't accidental. It was intentional. News of the crime spread quickly through the community. Westbridge had never seen anything like it. Neighbors struggled to process what had happened. The same boys who laughed, who talked about cars and dreams, were gone. People asked the same question over and over. How did no one stop this? There had been warning signs. Family members had raised concerns years earlier. Reports had been made. Social workers had visited the home. But nothing seemed severe enough to trigger removal. Leanne was viewed as overwhelmed, not dangerous. That distinction would haunt many people afterward. The trial exposed everything.
The hidden relationship between Leanne and Marcus, the fear of losing the children, the excalibrating pressure from authorities, the disturbing belief that death was somehow a form of protection. Prosecutors didn't hold back. They described the crime as calculated and cruel, not a moment of madness, but a deliberate act carried out step by step. The defense tried to shift focus to Leanne's past, her unstable childhood, the trauma she had experienced, the fear that consumed her when she thought her children might be taken away. But none of it justified what happened. Nothing could. In the end, both Leanne and Marcus pleaded guilty. The courtroom was silent as the judge delivered the sentence: life imprisonment. A reflection, the judge said, of the gravity of what they had done. Not just the loss of 2 lives, but the destruction of an entire family. The surviving children would carry those memories forever. The aftermath left a permanent mark on Westbridge. A memorial appeared outside the school Ethan and Liam once attended. Flowers, letters, small tokens left by people who either knew them or simply felt the weight of the tragedy. Local residents organized a fundraiser for the boys' funeral. Hundreds showed up. Among them were motorcycle enthusiasts who rode in a slow procession honoring the boys' love of engines and speed. It was a quiet, powerful tribute, but it didn't answer the deeper questions. A formal review later concluded that while the tragedy couldn't have been predicted with certainty, there had been missed opportunities. Concerns weren't followed through, patterns weren't fully recognized, and assumptions were made that cost 2 lives. Years later, the house on Aldergrove was demolished. In its place, an open space was created, a tree planted at the center, simple and unmarked to outsiders, but deeply meaningful to those who knew why it was there. A reminder, not just of what happened, but of what can happen when warning signs are overlooked, when power and control go unchecked behind closed doors. Ethan and Liam's story didn't end in that house. It lived on in the conversations that followed, in the changes made to protect other children, and in the quiet determination of a community that refused to forget them.